Imagine you're walking home on a beautiful, clear afternoon. Out of nowhere, the wind shifts, a shadow passes over you, and within seconds, black storm clouds blot out the sun. A single raindrop hits your cheek, and then the sky just opens up. There's a story about a young girl who found herself caught in exactly this kind of sudden downpour. Her father was watching her run toward the house from the front window, but he noticed something unusual. With every loud crash and bright flash of lightning, she stopped running, looked straight up at the sky, and smiled. When she finally got to the porch, completely soaked, her father wrapped her in a blanket and asked why she kept stopping to look up. She smiled and said, "I stopped because God was taking my picture." Life has a habit of dropping sudden storms on us: an unexpected health diagnosis, a financial failure, the loss of someone we love. When the heavy rain of life starts pelting our backs, do we put our heads down and hide, or do we look up, trusting that God is still there? The Apostle Paul writes in the book of Romans that going through hard times actually serves a distinct purpose. Enduring the rain builds our resilience. That resilience builds deep character, and that character leads to a hope that doesn't easily break. Let's look at the Sea of Galilee. It's a large freshwater lake surrounded by hills. One evening, after a long day of teaching, Jesus invited his closest followers to get into a boat and cross over to the eastern side. Halfway across, a freak storm blew in. The winds howled and massive waves started crashing over the sides of their small wooden boat. Keep in mind, several of these men were professional fishermen. They knew this water intimately, and even they were terrified they were going to drown. And where was Jesus? He was at the back of the boat, asleep on a pillow. The disciples woke him up, panicking, asking if he even cared they were about to die. Jesus then calms the water with a simple command, showing them that even when God seems silent or inactive, he still directs the path of the storm. We see a similar dynamic in the town of Capernaum. After Jesus stepped off a boat, a massive crowd of people immediately surrounded him. The pressing of bodies was so tight it was almost suffocating, with everyone pushing and shoving to get a glimpse of him. Somewhere in that crush of people was a frail woman who had been sick for 12 long years. She had spent all her money on doctors, but her condition only grew worse. Desperate, she pushed her way through the chaotic mass of people, thinking to herself that if she could just reach out and touch the hem of his clothing, she would heal. She reaches out, and instantly she feels her illness leave her. Jesus stops immediately. Dozens of people were bumping into him, but he knew the exact difference between the casual brushing of a moving crowd and the intentional reach of someone in pain. He sees our individual struggles, even when we feel swallowed up by the noise. Now, sometimes our setbacks feel deeply unfair. Take the biblical story of Job. By all accounts, Job was an honest, generous person who tried his best to honor God. Yet, in a very short span of time, he lost his wealth, lost his children, and his physical health. This diagram represents how we usually think about fairness. Bad deeds result in bad outcomes. Job's friends assumed he must have done something terrible to deserve this tragedy, but they were looking at a broken scale. Job was experiencing kinam. It's like receiving a massive bill for a service you never ordered. This was suffering without a clear cause, a tragedy that existed outside the usual rules of reward and punishment. Despite having no idea why he was losing everything, Job refused to curse God. Instead, he looked past his current pain, declaring his conviction that he had a living Redeemer who would eventually step in and make it right. That feeling of complete despair shows up again centuries later, right after Jesus was crucified. 2 of his followers were walking away from Jerusalem on the road to Emmaus. All their hopes had been pinned on Jesus, and now he was dead. They were crushed, confused, and grieving. Another traveler joins them on the road and starts explaining the scriptures to them. It was Jesus himself. But their grief and disappointment were so heavy that they walked alongside him for miles without ever realizing who they were talking to. When we hit rock bottom, our vision gets narrow. We focus so hard on the pain and confusion of the moment that we forget God is right there, walking the dusty road with us. He sees the entire arc of the story, even when we can only see the current chapter. In the 19th century, an author named Ellen G. White wrote about a period in her life where she sat with her face in her hands, completely overwhelmed by despair. During this time, she had a vivid, comforting dream. In the dream, a guide led her to a steep, fragile-looking stairway. As she climbed, she was told to keep her eyes fixed upward so she wouldn't get dizzy and fall. When she reached the top, she stood before a door, and her guide instructed her to set down all the little possessions and heavy emotional baggage she had carried up the steps. She cheerfully left them behind and walked in. Inside, she stood face to face with Jesus. She wrote that his gaze rested on her, and she knew immediately that he understood every single circumstance of her life and every ache in her mind. He simply smiled, placed his hand on her head, and said, "Fear not." She dropped to the floor, finally resting in a peace that had escaped her for years. We've looked at several distinct moments of hardship: the sheer terror of a sinking boat, the isolation of being sick and lost in a crowd, the ash heap of an unfair loss, and a sad walk out of town after everything seemed to fail. As you prepare for your Sabbath school discussion this week, I want you to take a moment and look at these 3 questions regarding your own experiences with the unpredictable weather of life. First, how has the specific setback you are facing right now impacted your picture of God? Are you struggling to see his true character through the clouds? Second, are you turning to him as your comforter in prayer, trusting that he is still leading your life? And finally, is your heart open to learning humble trust in his goodness, even when things feel difficult and unfair? Take some time today to write down your answers. Share your survival story with someone who might be struggling right now. And remember, the next time the sky goes dark and the thunder cracks, you can always look up and smile at the lightning.